Well, we'll go ahead and get started. First, thanks for having us. It's a busy time of year, I know, for everybody. Parents are starting to do the transitions. We've had lots of meetings, lots of activity with education services and co-op in our building for sure this last month. But I'm Jared Reeves, and I'm CEO at Sunshine School and Development Center. And joining me with me today, who is actually probably way more of an expert at transitioning to kindergarten or transitioning into the public school system, is Karen Walker. She's our children's service manager. So we'll kind of tag team a little bit. Again, it's really casual. We'll run through our presentation, kind of hit some things that over the years we've heard and things that we've learned from parents that are transitioning, things that our education development specialists have learned. And so we'll kind of run through those, run through a timeline, hit the high points, and then we'll leave the IEP expert, Brian, to take it away after that. So we'll hit on it a little bit, but he'll go into more detail. Of course. Hold on just a second. Oh, hey. There you go. Okay. So in our case, what we always like to talk about is for our kiddos that go to Sunshine School, and currently we have about 110 that are in our EIDT services. So, your child graduates from EIDT, what's next? We understand that the transition can be scary. You're going from somewhere that you may have been, like in our case, since the child was 12 to 18 months. And so it's scary to transition into the school system, but we have a huge team that'll help you. So real quick, I'm going to let Karen kind of touch on the timeline. And I'll let you take it away, Karen.
All right. Hi guys, thanks for having us. So a timeline for that year before your child is going to go to kindergarten. Something that we have to do if your child is in a center, an EIDT center like Sunshine School, or receiving services from the co-op. Some of your children may be doing that. Those places, we send a list to the public schools of children who are kindergarten eligible in January, and that is what gets the process started. And then in February, we start setting up those transition meetings. And for us, in our setting at Sunshine School, that looks like the public school will come to Sunshine School, or we'll do a Zoom meeting with COVID. And then the Sunshine School representative, the special education teacher, will also meet with the family, the public school, and we'll talk about what services the child may need, and that's called a referral conference, and they will sign paperwork. You'll sign paperwork to start that referral process to public school special education services to see if, let me try to, sorry, I just read that there's a strange background noise. Is that something everyone is experiencing, or just Brian?
It sounds like a background, like a movie monster or something. I'm not really sure what it is. I know that's strange, but that's what it reminds me of.
Okay, is that everybody experiencing that feedback?
Yeah, I was hearing it too, so.
Okay, I'm not sure what to do about that. Tell me if it gets worse or better. I can try to move. So that happens in February if your child is with co-op or in an EIDT center. If your child is receiving private therapy services and isn't being served by an EIDT center or by co-op, then I would suggest that you start contacting the school district that you're in about that time and let them know that you have a child who's receiving therapy and you feel like they may qualify for, if you think that they may need special education services, and let them know so that they can set up a conference with you and get all of that started if you're not with
Hey,
co-op.
Karen,
Yes.
I wonder if you try to exit and rejoin, if
Okay.
your sound will get better. I don't know. It's super strange.
I'll try it. Sorry about that.
No, it's
Yeah,
okay.
I was trying to make sure everybody was muted. It looks like they are, so I don't think
Yeah.
that's the issue.
I'll even come back and
Okay.
Okay. All right. Well, I'll kind of take it away then while we're waiting. So as she said, you would contact the school district, and everyone's open to school choice. So you don't necessarily have to choose the school for special education services in your district, but obviously it's preferable for ease of access. So in April or May, we recommend, and these are all going on now, that you schedule a tour for your child to visit the school. At that point in time, you can meet the teachers, meet people in administration, and then prior to the end of May, the school will contact you to review evaluations, and then they'll set up your initial IEP meeting. Karen, I'm going to see if yours is any better now.
Yeah.
Okay.
Am I better? Can you hear me?
You still have a weird sound.
Let me try to come into my phone.
Okay. Okay. All right. And so, the next step in the process is, your child is enrolled in kindergarten. So now what? Right. So you've did those initial meetings, you've prepared. So at this point, what you will do is you will have your IEP, or your individualized education program, with your supports and services. And this is where they'll determine everything that the child needs to be successful in their education pursuits. In some cases, you may not have an IEP, you may have a 504 plan. A 504 plan is different in such as it just is, what accommodations does the student need? That could be, a physical accommodation. It could be blind accommodation. What does the student need to reach academic success? And then also, to be able to access the services in that environment. And so again, we'll let Brian take over all of the IEP things later. Normally in our transition meetings with students, we would talk about the IEP, but he's by far an expert in that. So we'll let him take that away from us.
Right. Is this better, Jared?
Yes, that
Okay.
is. All right. So we're ready to start the IEP planning process.
Okay. So when I'm talking to families about the meetings and the IEPs with the public schools, something that I always want them to know is to be a communicator with the IEP team, the teachers and the administrators. If as you guys are meeting for the IEP, if there's something that you don't agree with, or you don't understand, or have any questions, just always know that you can stop the meeting at any time, ask for more clarification. You can ask to meet again at another time. You are really in control of what the outcome of that meeting is, or at least to be able to stop and reconvene if needed. Always remember that you can also call a meeting at any time once the IEP is established. If you have questions, or you feel like something is not going the way it should, or if something's going well and you just want to talk about maybe the next steps, then always know that you can call that meeting. You are, like, aside from your child, the most important part of that team, and you can call a meeting at any time. Be an advocate, of course, for your child first. And again, if you're just not comfortable with something, you don't have to sign it right then. You can, like I said, you can stop the meeting, ask to reschedule it, get support from outside of the school system if you need it.
Yeah, and like Karen said, be an advocate first. I think this is one of the most important things if we attend and help during the IEP process, is that we tell parents, okay, you're going in to set up a plan to set up your child for success in education. So be an advocate first. Everyone knows that their kids are great, their kids are making good strides, but now is the time to advocate for what they need and be a parent second. Some of the times we've been in an IEP meeting, they may be talking about, can the child write their name? And the parent is like, oh, yes, we've made so many strides in preschool. The child can write their name and, it's beautiful and it goes over perfectly. And we're so proud. And then we just kind of redirect the question into, so can they write their name without prompting? Can anyone besides you read their name? All of those things about, taking off your parent hat and putting on your advocate hat. And this, goes even into adult person-centered planning. Just a good thing to know, now is not the time to really brag. We're not asking you to hold back, but you are going into a meeting that they're going to set the course and trajectory of your education for your kids. So that's really important. Some of the things Karen and I were talking, getting ready for this, some of the things too to bring up in the IEP, we've had parents that, they don't think about transportation, for example. So your child's been in an EIDT learning center or a preschool center, and maybe they've been provided transportation and maybe not. Maybe the parents have always dropped them off. So, but one of the things you don't think about is when you're signing up and you say, yes, my child will need transportation, he'll ride the bus. We've had more than one parent come back and say, okay, that was a disaster, because they didn't think through okay, my child's never ridden, by themselves. They've always been in a car seat. They aren't used to just climbing on this big monstrous bus. And, we have touch a truck type of things here where the school systems bring the buses in and we take the kids on them and let them see. And we do have kids that are like, no way, no how, I'm not going on there. And so, just simple things like that, just thinking through not only how the child is going to be successful in education, but how are they going to get there? Those are the things that you can bring up, of course, during those IEPs. And specialized transportation is available. It's just, not the first thing that would be offered. So that's just kind of one of the ways.
Yeah, you definitely
yeah.
have to ask for that if it's a need.
Yeah.
Yes.
And so I'll kick this part off and let
Okay.
Karen kind of jump in. But so the biggest question or the biggest, I guess, concern that we receive from parents when they transition from an early learning center into public school education is, what about therapy? A lot of times, especially in our center, we'll have children that are receiving up to 90 minutes of speech and OT and PT every week. So a main difference that isn't really well explained is that when you go into public school education, your therapy becomes more educational focused versus when you're in an early learning center, it's more medical focused. So example might be your speech therapist at an early learning center has identified that you have a choking hazard. And so in your individualized speech therapy, they're working on, strengthening the muscles and, working all of those things to get you past that, that point. Well, in an educational system, what will come up is they may say, okay, your child has a choking hazard. Their food needs to be pureed. Okay, we'll put that in their plan. Their food is pureed and check, we're moving on. Your speech therapy moves into more of educational versus kind of a medical realm. That's just one example. Another thing that we always tell parents is that you can continue your outpatient therapy. And in most cases, depending on the need and the assessments, we really highly recommend that you do so. So this is probably one of the biggest challenges that you could face if your child receives a lot of therapy services in early intervention and then they transition to the school system. So again, it's educational based. And so a lot of that is done in a group setting. It may be with 2 or more students. But one of the things you need to know is that through the IDEA Act, your child is entitled to therapy services if they qualify for therapy services. And that will be paid by the school system. We've helped parents navigate because a lot of times what happens is the school system, no fault of their own, but they will say your child's on Medicaid or, TEFRA in most cases. And so what we need you to do is sign the form so that we can bill for your therapy services. And that's perfectly fine, except that when you are starting into outpatient services, you develop this pyramid, right? So there's only one funding source, which is Medicaid. And now you have a treating therapist at the school and you have a treating therapist in outpatient. Those therapists have to work together, billing issues ensue. It's just extremely difficult. So we always recommend that you talk to your outpatient therapy center and along with the school. And if, let's say, you may be getting 90 minutes of outpatient therapy. If the school says, okay, what we think on the education side is you qualify for 30 minutes. Our recommendation is that you don't sign over your Medicaid coverage to the school. You keep that on the outpatient side. It just makes everything much smoother transition. And it's just one of those things that you don't think about, and it's not really explained that well in the process. Karen, do you have anything you wanted to add?
Yeah, I think that's perfect. And the other thing that you'll see is, which Jared said, just a reduction in therapy times, and maybe even a reduction in like physical therapy, possibly if your child's able to walk and open doors. So if that's, if you still want them to work on those other things like balance and coordination that may not be worked on in an education setting, then that private therapy is pretty key.
Can I hop in there real quick, Jared and Karen,
Yes.
on the Medicaid?
Yes.
So I'm still somewhat new to Arkansas, and we do let the school bill our Medicaid for our son because he doesn't do outpatient therapy. But we have in the past gotten bills from Medicaid for this. And so I've taken it to the school district. I'm like, this is kind of a violation of that free appropriate public education aspect. And so parents, if you ever get a bill from Medicaid, you do not have to pay it.
Right.
It is not your responsibility. So don't be confused by that. You can just ignore that, or you can give it to the school. Sometimes there's mix-ups in that billing process or whatever, and they will send it to the parents. You are not obligated to pay for that. That is the school's responsibility to take care of that.
Yeah, and that's very true. And because even in early intervention services, you can be inundated with bills and payments and things from Medicaid and private insurance if you have it. So that is a very good point. And again, we're not advocating that the school system's not doing anything wrong if they bill your Medicaid. But if you want to retain outpatient services, it is just much easier to take the educational therapies that are funded already in the school and keep your Medicaid for private outpatient.
Definitely. All right. Something else that I found helpful and that I like to tell parents, even if you've had you've had the IEP meeting with the teacher, and that usually happens before the school lets out for summer. And so, they're going over everything that they're going to be able to offer your child to help them access the education in the best way. And that school teacher, your child's primary teacher, is going to be at that meeting and learn all of those things, most likely. Sometimes though, if you're going from like kindergarten to first grade, or even if a new school opens or a teacher leaves and they bring in another teacher, which often happens, that teacher, it's very helpful to have a letter or something like a fact info sheet on your child that just you can update each year and take to your child's team of school treatment team, therapists, nurses, teachers, whoever is going to be helping out, and let them know some of those really key things about your child that you want to share. Are they verbal or nonverbal? How do they communicate with you? Is there anything that will really upset them? How do they calm down? How do they tell you if they need to go to the bathroom? Are they able to go on their own? How much support do they need? Just like an info sheet, something like that, because the teachers are getting a lot of information about a lot of different students, and that would be very helpful. And then to just update it each year and pass it on to the next teacher. Just learning to, sorry, Jared, learning to, when you go, they usually have the open house, and just talking to your child's team to find out how they want you to communicate with them, and setting and establishing that plan, and then establishing, what your expectations are for that too. It's very different to go from, a private therapy setting or an EIDT center setting to public school. And like Jared said that earlier, that's a scary process, but also it was scary when your child started the private therapy or when they started an EIDT center. So just keep that line of communication open, and always know that you can call that meeting or schedule something and get some more information and some more answers.
Yeah. And, like we said, and Karen said, communication is key. You almost can't over communicate. Almost every special education teacher that we've worked with, or therapists in the school system that had questions, you almost can't communicate too much. They're there to help, and they want to help. One of the other things too that's really helpful is if you come from an outpatient therapy center with preschool services like Sunshine School, or Elizabeth Richardson Center, or Kids for the Future. If you had a therapist there, maybe your child works on an AAC device, so they communicate, they're nonverbal, and they communicate with that. If you have questions, reach out to their old therapist. Connect their old therapist with the therapist at school. Our therapy teams love that, because obviously we're all in the business of, keeping the child's advancements moving. And so, that is something that's very important. Don't be afraid to call your preschool teacher for help, or your therapist, or, someone like Karen that runs the services. And that's one of the things we can't stress, too much, because we really do want the transition to be smooth. Mm-hmm. That's kind of, we've kind of hit the high points. We'll be happy to send you our contact information. Again, reach out. Even if your child doesn't go to Sunshine School, we have many experts that have been through this several times and are happy to help you in any kind of evaluation process, or honestly, just any questions that you have. So thanks, everybody. And I guess we'll turn it over to Brian to kind of talk about IEPs. Is that how you want to do it, Lindsay?
Sorry. Hey, does anybody have any questions right now for Jared or Karen that you'd like to ask? Nope. Okay. Well, I guess we will keep moving then and go to Brian.
All right, sounds good. Give me
And Brian,
just
you
a
should be able to
moment.
share your screen.
Okay. See if I can bring this up here. There we go. All right, so I tend to share way too much information and overwhelm people with all the things that about IEPs, but I kind of do that because I want parents to realize, as Jared and Karen pointed out, that you are your child's best advocate. And so you have to be armed with all the knowledge and information that you can possibly have. And as Jared and Karen pointed out, like if you have questions or you're confused by things or just want to have a follow-up conversation, I am more than happy to do that. So you leave that early childhood world and you come into that school age world, and we start throwing around things like FAPE and LRE and IEP and FBA and BIP, and it gets very, very confusing. So I'm going to start off with a couple of comic strips here. One of the things I think that's super important is that we always put people first. I know there's some disability communities that prefer disability terminology first, but we generally tend to err on the side of people first. And so I thought this was kind of funny. A person saying, so what do you prefer to be called, handicapped, disabled, or physically challenged? And the person says, Joe would be fine. And so the most appropriate label is usually the one that people's parents have given them. So I kind of find that kind of funny. This is for autism, but this is kind of funny as well. Just why do people call autism a label? I don't think that's right. My label is cadence. One of my ingredients is autism. And so, you know, obviously in the Down syndrome community, you know, Down syndrome does play a big role in people's lives, but we want to err on that side of person first language as much as possible. And so it's always important to just encourage your child's school-based team to talk about them in terms of their personhood. This is another great little cartoon. It says, for a fair selection, everybody has to take the same exam. Please climb the tree. And it says, Albert Einstein said, everybody's a genius, but if you judge a fish by its ability to climb a tree, it will live its whole life believing that it's stupid. And I think another thing that we often need to think about as parents is that we need to make sure that because that IEP, that individualized education program, is often deficit based. We look at all the deficits and then we create goals to try to close the gap. We also want to look at their strengths and realize that, you know, not everyone can climb a tree. And that's okay. And so it's important for us to always consider those strengths. We also, so I'm a professor of education. I teach special education courses as well as some other courses. And we often think about that equality aspect. And I have 4 of my own children, and they sometimes complain that one person gets something over another. And I say, well, I don't mind to treat you guys equally if you want. And they immediately go, no, I don't want to be treated equally, because that means my 17-year-old has to give up his car, his phone, his independence, because his 11-year-old sister doesn't get all those things. So we want to treat people equitably. And so when we're thinking about moving into that school age world, and I know I was a director of early childhood special education in Missouri, so that world's not unfamiliar to me as well, but we want to think about equity. What does a child need in order to be able to do the things that we want kindergartners to do? And then another little cartoon or saying here, fair isn't everyone getting the same thing, fair is everybody getting what they need in order to be successful. And so parents, I just really encourage you to do that with your kids when you're in those meetings, to talk about what does my child need, to constantly ask those questions. What does my child need in order to be successful in this environment? And that can be therapy, that can be, you know, teaching, that can be lots of different things, behavior, emotional, social, emotional things. We will cover all of those things. We're going to skip that one. The other thing that I think is super important, and I think a lot of us, at least my age and probably a little bit younger, but some of the even younger people don't see it this way, but special education isn't necessarily a place. It's not the room down the hallway. What it is it's actually supports and services that we bring to students through what's called an individualized education program, that IEP. And so We might have an adapted curriculum. We might have environmental adaptations or accommodations. We might have behavior support plans. We might have consultation from specialists. We're going to bring those to the child. Sometimes we'll bring the child to those services, but just because a child gets services doesn't mean the child has to leave their environment in order to receive them. And I think that's an important conversation that needs to happen during those IEP meetings. So kind of the goals is to just kind of define what special education is. We're going to talk a little bit about just IDEA 2004. That's the most updated version of the special education law. We're going to talk about IEPs, a continuum of services. We're going to talk a little bit about supplementary aids and services, modifications and accommodations, least restrictive environment, inclusion, something called burden of proof, and then also when is it okay to become more restrictive? So what is special education? It's specifically designed instruction. So we're going to design instruction based on what your child needs. So that's what special education is. We're going to provide it to the student who has the identified disability, and we're going to give them access to the general education curriculum. And I think that's very important, that just because a child gets special education services, that's not a separate curriculum. That is specially designed instruction that allows the student to have access to that general education curriculum, because we know that sometimes the disability makes it harder for students to access that general education curriculum. So think back to that cartoon with the equity versus equality. We want to make sure that we're giving them what they need in order to be able to access the general education curriculum. We want to do it in the least restrictive environment possible, because we know that when they grow up to be adults, that they hopefully are going to live in a world that includes their non-disabled peers. And so if we don't foster that K through 12, it's going to be really hard when they're outside of the world of the public school system to be able to be integrated into their community. And so we want to do that along the way. And that's called that least restrictive environment. And then we don't refer to students as special education students. We refer to students as students who receive special education services. And general education students are a part of this. And one thing that is super important, and I come from Missouri, and Missouri's got, depends on where you're at, kind of a backwards way of thinking about special education, but Arkansas, I've been very impressed with their forward way of thinking about special education. So I think we're pretty blessed to be here in Arkansas, excuse me, because there's a push for inclusion. There's a push for kids to be in the general classroom as much as possible. And I think especially a lot of times we think about kiddos who have disabilities and, oh, we want to give them as much as they can so that they can be successful in the classroom. And that's, of course, what we want. But a lot of times the thinking is that we need to do that in a separate environment, and that, you know, once they reach a certain platform, then they can be in the regular classroom. Well, that's not the case, and that's not the way the law is written. The way the law is written is that students are in the general classroom, and we only become more restrictive if that's necessary. So kids don't have to earn their way into that general education classroom. They are already a part of that just because they are enrolled in that school. Like I said, it's not a place, it's a set of services. Where a child with a disability receives those services is the child's placement. We don't determine placement. We don't determine where they get their services based on the number of minutes they get. So Jared and Karen talked about therapy services. You know, maybe you get private therapy in 90 minutes, you know, a week or whatever. And in the school, maybe it's 30 minutes a week. But just because they're getting that time doesn't necessarily mean they have to leave their environment. Sometimes they may need to, sometimes they may not need to. And this should be one of the last things that we talk about when we are going through that IEP, because what we do is we go through what's called the present level of academic and functional performance. We talk about, of course, we talk about the deficits and the areas that the student needs support, and then we build goals off of that, and we talk about how long it's going to take, you know, how long the minutes of service are for that the kids to hopefully meet those goals. And then one of the last things that we would talk about is where those goals are going to be worked on. And we always think of children with disabilities as general education students first. So IDEA 2004, you're going to hear that a lot. A lot of people say IDEA, I say IDEA. either one is fine. You're going to hear that term FAPE. It's free, appropriate public education. This is kind of the guiding principle of this law, that school districts must provide a free, appropriate public education to students with disabilities. So that's why I chimed in when we were talking about the Medicaid aspect, because when I got that bill, just kind of being new to Arkansas, I was like, I don't understand why I'm being billed for my son's services at the school district. This should not be happening. And that was correct. That should not have happened, because we are entitled to a free, appropriate public education for our child. So there are several principles that are found within IDEA. And let me go back one. There we go. The principles are zero reject. So basically what that means is we are not going to say to you, we can't educate your child. It does not matter how significant or insignificant their disability is, we are going to take them. You show up on our doorstep, we are going to take your child. We will not reject any child for any reason. And so IDEA guarantees that that will happen. Your child is entitled to a non-discriminatory evaluation. And so we want to make sure that that evaluation is a fair assessment of your child. Your child is entitled to an individualized and appropriate education. So a lot of schools, and again, I'm not talking about Arkansas. Our experience in Arkansas has been really good, but I'm in Siloam Springs, and so different districts may be a little bit different. But if they say something to you like, oh, all the kids with autism go to this classroom, or all the kids with intellectual disabilities go to this classroom, that's not individualized. And so we have to really kind of rein that kind of language in as educators, and we have to really have a conversation about what your individual child needs and is it appropriate. So that's an aspect that needs to be part of that process. We always talk about that least restrictive environment. We want kids to have access to their non-disabled peers. You are entitled to something that's called procedural due process. And so basically what that means is if things go wrong in this special education process, this is a federal law, and procedural due process is guaranteed by our Constitution. And so there is a process that we would go through in order to rectify situations that don't work out. And then, of course, parent participation, as Jared and Karen pointed out, you are one of the most important members of that team, and your voice needs to be heard. You are an equal member of that team, and any data that a team has on your child, you should also have access to that data so that you can be making decisions as a team. So that's a super important piece. There's also the letter of the law versus the spirit of the law. And I tend to lean more on the spirit of the law. The law may actually say this, in the details, but we also want to go like, what was Congress's point in doing this? Why did they want this? And so that's something we need to think about as well. We're going to create that individualized education program. And that individualized education program, the IEP, must be designed to allow the child with disabilities to access the general education curriculum and environment. And then we have to consider the individual, their unique needs, and we have to use the necessary supplementary aids and services to help that child be able to access that curriculum. And unfortunately, it can be an incredibly long process. So you think about that transition from early childhood into school age. They often will conduct a new evaluation. And so kind of what this timeline could look like is they could take up to 30 days to review the existing data. So the data that the early childhood intervention team has for the child, they have up to 30 days to kind of review that data. And then they may decide, yes, we're going to do further testing. They have up to 60 days to conduct that testing. And then once that testing is done and then they share those results with you, they have up to 30 days to create an individualized education program after that. So this could honestly take 120 days if a school district wanted to stretch it out like that. I have never been part of a school or a district that took 120 days to do all of that, because honestly, we see a child who we suspect has a disability and we want to get that child services as quickly as possible, but it can be a very long process, and just know that you need to be patient through this process. And parents, if you have any questions or anyone has anything you want to jump in, just stop me and I'll be happy to discuss. When you go to the IEP meeting, so the early childhood piece looks a little bit different, but the school age the school age program there are people that are required to be in this meeting. You have to be present. So they technically can have a meeting without you, but that can only happen after they've made several efforts to get in touch with you and schedule meetings at times that work for you and for the team. They can't do initial meetings and initial testing without you, but once your child has an IEP and things like that, they can meet without you. It's not a good idea, but they can do that. But essentially, you have to be there. There does need to be a regular education teacher there. Even if your child is not going to be in the regular education classroom very much, there still has to be a regular education teacher there, someone who can answer questions about the regular education curriculum. They have to be present. A special education teacher has to be there. A school administrator or someone who would serve as what's called the LEA, that's the local education authority. That's the person who, excuse me, who makes sure that the funding is designated for the decisions that the team has made for your child. And so that could be like a special education director, it could be a school administrator. You might hear the term TOSA here in Arkansas. It's a teacher on special assignment. That person can sometimes serve as the local education authority, but that person has to be present at that meeting. And then you have to have someone with expertise in interpreting evaluation results who can answer questions about that, because a lot of times they start talking about these numbers and about standard deviations and all the statistics and stuff that you're thinking, I don't remember this from my high school or my college math classes. And so someone needs to be able to interpret that for you. And then if we're, and this is a long way down the road, but if we're talking about post-secondary transition goals, we would want to have a community service representative as well. And then of course, when it's appropriate for your child to be there and to be a part of that meeting, we would want your child to be there as well. The only way that some of these people can not be there is if you give written permission for them not to be there. So if you sit down to have an IEP meeting and they say, oh, Mrs. Jones, the second grade teacher, isn't going to make it today, you have the right to say, you know what, I would like to reschedule this meeting at a time when Mrs. Jones can be here. You do not have to have the meeting. It is up to the school to make sure that they have a regular education teacher there. If you're okay with that, with Mrs. Jones or whoever not being there, then the school district should actually have a form that you fill out and that you sign stating that it's okay for them to be absent from the meeting. So an IEP has a lot of detail components to it. We have that present level of academic and functional performance, and that's where we go over the results of the information that we have. What do we know about the child? What do we know that they can do academically and functionally? We talk about their social and their emotional. We talk about behavioral stuff. It is a big, it can be up to several pages long, but it's a big document that we just talk about how they're doing with the data that we know about them. We talk about special considerations. So we may talk about, is your child blind? Does your child speak a language other than English? Does your child, like Jared and Karen talked about, does your child need transportation in order to receive these services? It is up to the school district to make sure that your child can get to those services, so they could provide special transportation. And then when you talk about that, does your child need a seatbelt? Does your child need a booster? Does your child need to have a 5-point harness? If those things are necessary in order for your child to access their services, the school district has to provide that. And so there's lots of considerations that they talk about. If your child has behavior issues, I know my own son has behavior issues. And so we often talk, we check that box that says, yes, my child does have some behavior concerns. And anytime you check yes in any of those special considerations, that should be addressed later in the IEP. Then we talk about the goals. We talk about, what is my child going to learn and work on during the course of this IEP year? Okay, and an IEP year is going to look different than an academic year. So like my son had his IEP meeting, what is this? This is May. We probably had it in mid-April. And so his goals changed a little bit. And so now his IEP year goes April to April, whereas the school year goes August to May. So it can kind of get off a little bit, but those IEP goals are designed for the for the IEP year. And then, of course, we look at those deficits and concerns that we found in that present level. We talk about services. What services is that child going to get? That could be occupational therapy, physical therapy, speech therapy. If your child has vision problems, maybe they have an orientation and mobility specialist. If your child has behavior concerns, maybe they're going to have a BCBA come in and work with your child. We're also going to talk about supplementary aids and services at this time. We're also going to talk about supports for school personnel. So maybe there's someone in the school who has not worked with someone like your child and they need some training. That can be written into the IEP as well. And we'll jump back to those supplementary aids and services here in a little bit. We talked about transportation. We're also going to talk about how often will your child be in the regular education environment. And that regular education, so if your school day is from 8 o'clock to 3:30, that is the number of we go by minutes in the world of special education. That's the number of minutes that your child is in school, and that they would have access to the regular education environment. And maybe your child goes to a teacher and receives special education services at different times throughout the day. They would not have access to their general education peers at that time. But when they're at lunch, when they're at recess, when they go to music, art, PE, or computer class or library, those are all times that your child would have access to that regular education environment. And so that figures into that as well. And then we consider where we're going to give those services to your child. It's important to know that once you give permission to provide services, you have 10 days to consider the proposed changes that are made. So like Jared and Karen said, if you're not comfortable with things, don't sign any documents. You can say, you know what? You guys have had a lot of time to think through this, and I literally have gotten this information today, and it's all kind of overwhelming. I would like to go think about this. And that's where you can take that document home and you can talk to your spouse, you can call a friend, you could get on the phone with me. I would be happy to talk with you about that as well. And you have 10 days to consider all that. What does that mean? What just happened? And then, but on that day 11, those changes could be put into place. So the school district does have the right to put those changes into place. Like this is after you've given initial approval for your child to have services and stuff. But once there's an IEP and those changes have been made, on day 11, they take place with or without your permission. And so that doesn't often happen. At least that's not been my experience in Arkansas. We've always been willing to come back and work on things, but the school district does have the right actually on day 11 to implement those changes unless you kind of come back and want to work on that again. So that's an important thing. So don't think, oh, I have 10 days and then on day 11, I'm going to go have a conversation, because on day 11, those things can actually be put into place with or without your permission if you've given initial permission to have the IEP. We're going to skip that part. Here's the continuum of placements for children with disabilities. So the least restrictive environment would be that all the services your child is going to get are brought to them in the general education classroom. So when my son was in 3rd grade, he was in his regular education environment 97% of his day. All of his services were brought to him in the regular classroom. And there was only one time a week where he was pulled out for speech therapy because we wanted him to work on some articulation goals in a more quiet environment. But everything else was brought to him in the regular classroom. And then you can see it gets more restrictive as we go. So maybe most services are provided in the classroom, but there's some pullout. Or maybe about half the services are provided in the classroom and half of the services are provided in a pullout setting. Maybe most of the services are pulled out. Maybe all of the services are pulled out. Or maybe they actually have to go to a separate school away from their non-disabled peers and they won't have access to their non-disabled peers. So the IDEA law ensures that all of this continuum of placements is available for children, because we know that lots of children will need, our neighbors are walking by, lots of children need different things. And so we want to make sure that those are all available to children. We always have to talk at least annually about placement, and it's based on that child's IEP. We want to do it as close to the child's home as possible, unless the IEP requires some other arrangement. We also have to think about any potential harmful effects on the child or the quality of services that the child needs. So if there's something that's not going to be beneficial to that child, we have to have that conversation. This is something that is super, super important. I have a friend who lives in South Carolina, and South Carolina basically believes that if your child gets modifications, they get pulled out of the classroom. They are so, in my opinion, backwards about how they do things. But the law actually says that a child with a disability may not be removed from the general education environment in age-appropriate regular classrooms solely because of needed modifications. So even if your child's getting an entirely modified curriculum, they do have the right to have that curriculum delivered to them in the regular education environment if the team decides that that's appropriate, okay? So just because they're getting modifications doesn't mean that they're pulled out of that classroom. Given the age and the assigned grade level of the students, and considering all the general education opportunities that this student would have if she or he were not a child with a disability, so we have to consider that as well. We also have to consider how can the student participate and progress in the regular class and non-academic settings with the use of supplementary aids and services. So those things that are going to help that child have access to all the things that a school would provide for kids without disabilities. And this must be the first conversation that your team has when it comes to determining the placement of your child. What supplementary aids and services does my child need in order to be able to be successful in that environment? And then your child team cannot say, we don't provide that here as an excuse to become more restrictive. The law doesn't support that. So if your child needs some very significant services and the team says, yes, we need those services for your child to be able to be successful, the school can't come back in later and go, oh, sorry, we don't provide those. That's not really an option. And then, of course, we don't determine where your child gets their services based on administrative convenience. You know, it works well for administration, so we're going to do it this way. We don't do that. We don't do that based on provider schedules. Well, you know what? The special education teacher, she only does pull out, so it won't work with her schedule. Well, that's not individualized for your child, or the master schedule of the school. For my own son, they've had to completely rework their special education teacher schedules because we were absolutely adamant that my son was going to get those services in the classroom. And so they had to rework their schedule in order to make that happen. So what are those supplementary aids and services? Well, they are aids and services that are provided in the regular classroom or other education-related settings and in extracurricular non-academic settings. They enable your child to be educated with their non-disabled peers. So we have to ask the question, what does your child need in order to be able to access that general education curriculum in the general education classroom? That's what a supplementary aid and services is designed to do. So here are some examples. It could be special education instruction. It could be a paraprofessional or a personal assistant. It could be instructional support provided by that paraprofessional. It could be an interpreter for someone who's deaf or hearing impaired. It could be just materials or specialized equipment that the child needs. It could be intensive short-term, specially designed instruction. It could be peer tutors or adult tutors. It could be a regularly scheduled consultation or collaboration among staff. It could be training. These are all things that could be used to support your child in that regular education environment. And we need to really think, we can't think of, and I know it says all the possible supplementary aids and services before determining that a student should leave the general education classroom. So the law doesn't say you have to exhaust it, but I think you have to have a good faith effort that you're trying as much as you can in order to provide that student with an education in the regular classroom. This is what the law actually says on least restrictive environment. It says special classes, separate schooling, or the other removal of children with disabilities from the regular education environment occurs only if the nature and severity of the child of the disability is such that education in regular classes with the use of supplementary aids and services cannot be achieved satisfactorily. So if we can't give your child an appropriate education with the use of supplementary aids and services because the nature or severity of their disability is such that it's not possible, then we would look at becoming more restrictive. And the law, that's directly from the IDEA law. And sometimes you have to be the one to be creative and suggest, ways to do this. And so that's why it's so important as parents, we need to educate ourselves on what this means and be willing to offer suggestions. Because sometimes people kind of get tunnel vision and they think, oh, kids with Down syndrome, this is what they have to have. I often tell my son's team, everything you know about Down syndrome, take it and throw it out the window, because my kid does things a lot different than typical kids with Down syndrome. So that's something to think about. Modifications and accommodations. We talk about this in the IEP. A child cannot be removed because of those modifications. We talked about that. So what are modifications? They are adjustments to the requirements of an assignment or a test. So basically a modification changes what the student is expected to learn and demonstrate. It changes the instructional level, it changes the concepts, and it changes the content. So that's what a modification is. It changes the construct through altering language load, content complexity, or cognitive complexity. So we're changing the nature of that curriculum. So here are some examples. We might have a simplified reading passage, or reduced responses, or modified grading, modified assignments, alternative materials, or maybe they do a portfolio instead of doing a test. Those would be examples of modifications. An accommodation does not change the nature of the assignment. It doesn't water it down. It doesn't make it easier. The student is still required to do the same cognitive work that kids without disabilities are required to do, but the accommodation allows them to be able to get access. So I think about a wheelchair ramp. Okay, so my mother-in-law lived with us for a number of years, and she was in a wheelchair, and she needed to be able to get into the house. Well, she needed a ramp to get into the house. She still had to get into the house. So she still had to do what everyone else in our family did. She just needed a ramp to get there. And so that was an accommodation that allowed her to be able to do that. And so we might do that for kids in the classroom. So some examples might be student marks in a book, or that the student reads the test aloud, or that someone else reads the test to them, or maybe they take a test in a special environment, or they get extra time to do the work. They might have multiple times where they do the work, or they do it in a separate room. They might listen to the book on audio tape versus having to read it themselves. They might get special seating or a study guide, things like that. This particular book by Julie Costin and Chelsea Tracy Bronson is such a great book to look at those accommodations and modifications. What is that least restrictive environment? It says, to the maximum extent appropriate, children with disabilities are educated with children who are non-disabled. That's what we want. And that special classes, separate schooling, or other removal of children occurs only if the nature and severity is such that the education in regular classes cannot be achieved satisfactorily with the use of supplementary aids and services. And like I said, Arkansas is doing a really good job with this. And so I often hear, though, from families outside of Arkansas that, in kindergarten, they want my kid to be in a self-contained classroom. They want my kid pulled out. They're not going to have access to their regular education peers. And I will often say, this is such a key question for parents to be able to ask. What supplementary aids and services have we tried with my child in the regular education environment that have shown that they're not successful, that would require them to be pulled out of that classroom? Well, and honestly, kids going from early childhood into kindergarten, there hasn't been anything tried because they haven't been in school yet. They haven't been in kindergarten yet. So for teams to say, oh, your child has to be pulled out for all of this, well, they haven't even tried it, so they don't know. And so that's a great question, I think, that parents need to be able to ask. So how do we do that? Well, basically, I'm not going to go through all this, but there's a lot of case law out there that talks about how to determine least restrictive environment. But basically, can services be transported? Can we move those services from one spot to another? Well, if we can, then we have to consider how to do that. Now, I'm thinking physical therapy. If your child has to work on going up and down stairs because their school has stairs, well, we can't move the stairs into the classroom and work on that. That's just not that doesn't work. So that service is not portable, but other services can be portable. Can they have meaningful education in that classroom? Is the student integrated as much as possible? And there's other tests here as well. And so lots of things that courts have ruled on to help us think through how we're going to provide that service to the child in the least restrictive environment. Why is it such a big deal? Well, that term inclusion, you might hear that term a lot. And I love this cartoon. It says, the first part says, stop, you can't swim, you're not allowed in the pool. So that child's not included. They're not even allowed. And that's kind of the way special education was for a while. And then we got to the point that we're like, okay, fine, they want inclusion, we're just gonna throw you in. You either sink or swim. Well, that didn't work either. So then here, the third one says, we'll start your swimming lessons with some fun activities and supports that will fade out later. And that's kind of the evolution of swimming lessons, and it's surprisingly similar to the evolution of including students with disabilities in the general education classroom. We want to provide those supports so that they can be successful, and we'll fade them out if they're no longer included or if they're no longer needed. So what is inclusion? It's not actually in the law. That term is not found in IDEA. It's not found in the Americans with Disabilities Act. It's not found in Section 504, which Jared referred to earlier. It's not found anywhere. But the principle is kind of foundational to that Brown versus Board of Education, where the Supreme Court said that Black students cannot be it's not okay for school districts to have separate schools for students of color. And so we needed to make sure that all students have access. So the disability community has kind of started with that Brown versus Board of Education as a way to begin to say, hey, you know what, our kids also need to have access as well. There's lots of court cases that have come along that have kind of defined what that looks like. So what is it? Well, let's start with what it's not. It's not just being in the classroom. So just because your kid is sitting in that kindergarten classroom does not mean they're included. Just because they're sitting in there doesn't mean they're included. They could literally be sitting in there off over in the corner doing their own thing. That's not inclusion. But what it is it's that continuum of opportunities within and outside the classroom. But I think the most important thing is what happens inside that classroom. What is that culture of that classroom, that building, or that district? It's that feeling of belonging that exists for the child. And it's also having cognitive access to the general education curriculum. So this is, if your child is going to be pulled out for services and that's what the team determines is best for that child, that's fine. But that child will also have access to their general education peers, and that's their inclusion time. I'm not a big fan of that, but that's often how it's referred to. What is happening to foster relationship? What is happening to foster friendship? What is happening to foster access to the curriculum? Those things are the things that make inclusion meaningful for all children. And I love this. This is a quote from that text that I showed you earlier. Everyone has the right to belong, to have friends, to have engaging curricula, and to have powerful instruction. Everyone has a right to be treated with dignity and with gentle, respectful support, and to experience that learning is intimately connected with a feeling like being part of the classroom. I love that. I love that. And so here's some pictures of my son and one of his friends at lunch. He has lunch with his friends. He is in class with his friends. That's what inclusion is it's that feeling that kids feel like they belong and that they're an important part of and an integral part of that classroom community. Is it appropriate for all children? Well, first of all, IDEA states the placement decisions must be made on the child's unique needs and the IEP, not on all those other things. And then secondly, yes, it is appropriate for all children. We have a basic human right to be included. Segregation is a violation of our child's civil rights, and what it looks like will be different for your child versus another child, but those basic tenets of should apply. I love this flow chart here. Can you be included? Do you have a disability? Well, no. Okay, so yes, you can be included. Do I have a disability? Yes. Are you breathing? No, then you're probably not going to be included. If you are breathing, then yes, you can be included. I like that. So the burden of proof, it's really up to the school district to answer the question why. Why can't the student's education, even with supplementary aids and services, be achieved in the regular classroom environment? Why must the student be removed from his or her typically developing peers for that specially designed instruction? That's a burden of proof that is up to the school to prove, and they have to have data to make that decision. And if they don't have data, then we don't need to be making those decisions. Let's see what else I want to say here. we're going to move on. So educational placement, you get to the end and you talk about percentage in the classroom or outside the classroom. And so that'll come up as well. And then how do I get my team to focus more on providing services in the classroom if that's what I want? Be willing to speak up. You have to, like Jared and Karen said, you have to be your child's best advocate. You have to ask for support. Don't hesitate to call up someone and say, hey, I need some help. Talk me through this. Know the law, understand all these things as much as you can. Offer ideas. Be the one who's willing to think outside the box, because sometimes schools don't do that very well. And be willing to question the decisions that are proposed by the team. Why are we doing this versus this? Why? And remember, they have to have that burden of proof, and it needs to be based on data. And then also know when it is in your child's best interest for your child to be more restrictive. Sometimes it is. Sometimes that classroom is so overwhelming and it's not healthy for your child. And they may need to be in an environment that is quieter, that is less distracting in order for them to be able to access that curriculum. And so you need to also speak up for that as well. And I think sometimes in this, in the state of Arkansas, when we're so focused on pushing kids in the regular classroom, we need to make sure that teachers are prepared. We need to make sure that the environment is set up so that the child will be successful. But sometimes the child may not be successful, and it's okay to advocate for something else and be willing to stand your ground. And that is all I have. So we'll stop there. Do you have questions? That was a lot of information. I kind of tend to word vomit when I go through this.
Crystal, Shannon, Andrea, do we have any questions for any of our speakers? Brian, was there recently a law change in the state of Arkansas in regards to IEPs?
Not that I'm aware of.
Okay.
I've talked with our state director, our state special education director, and he is very focused on inclusion, and I love that about him. And so I think Arkansas has just realized that they have not done it right over the last many years. And so they're trying to make things right by saying, hey, we need to start in the general education environment first.
Okay.
And we need to bring those services to the children in that environment. And so that's kind of that philosophy. And that's coming from the top down. And that's why you guys may not be aware of this, but like several universities are actually, we have grants that are allowing regular education teachers to take special education courses for free.
Oh, that's great.
And in order to learn more about special education and to get their certification for special education. And our university is one of those universities that has that opportunity to educate teachers. And so the state's put a lot of money in this and a lot of opportunities for training. And so there's not really been a law change, but I think just a change in realizing that, hey, we haven't been reading the law the way it's supposed to be, and we're going to do things differently now.
Okay.
Yeah, and I'll just add, I love what you said about, all the time, maybe an inclusive environment may not be the best, right? But you should try it, because what we hear a lot from parents, or what we help them with, is that, if you're coming from an early intervention learning center, I mean, our ratios are a lot less. You have potentially maybe 13 kids in a class. You usually have 2, sometimes 3 staff. There's a lot of help. When they go into a traditional classroom of kindergarten or first grade, there could be 26 students. There could be people that haven't, there could be children that haven't had any early intervention services or any preschool. It's just can be a really disruptive environment. So what we will see and what we will help them a lot is, they'll be frustrated. My child never had those behaviors when they were at Sunshine, or this never happened. And we're like, okay, maybe you need to go back to your IEP team and you need to find out. And it's okay to observe, go and observe the classroom. They'll let you in. One of the biggest changes, I think, it's not a law change in IEP, but this is one of the hardest. I don't want to say it's a battle between special education and outpatient therapeutic services, but it can at some point get adversarial because, the law says that your child has to have access to educational services based on how the school system does a typical day. But what that really means is that if you are, your child needs more intensive outpatient therapy, or a lot of autistic children now get applied behavior analysis or ABA therapy. We do it here. If you've seen a lot of progressions, it is okay to ask to have a modified school day for your child, because we understand that going from an early intervention center to a public school system where they're going from 8 a.m. to 3 or 3:30, they are not going to want to go to speech therapy again. They're not going to want to go to autism therapy. So it is, you're right. And I think the biggest thing for us is that, we want the children to have access to the education services. And what we do is work with them to kind of modify the regular classroom day. So maybe they won't be missing, or their pull-out time would have been at the end of the day. Because we do have some kids that have already completed their IEP that will, I'll use P Ridge for an example. We have a student going to P Ridge next year. They will come back to us at 2:00 for autism services or ABA therapy. So that is also an option, and it's not really well discussed. It's just new. So
yeah, and also
I had a question on that one.
You're good, Shannon. We can hear you.
Go for it.
Okay, I was like, I don't know if you can hear me because I was muting with kids. So my daughter actually attends Kids First. She doesn't start kindergarten until next year, but I need to hear this more than once. So I'm starting a year early and so forth. So we can ask for modified kind of school days. And that was one of the things I had noted down, is because I would want her to continue her developmental, her speech therapy, her occupational therapy, and physical therapy as well.
Yeah.
So is that something
you absolutely
work with them, or?
Yes, they'll actually help you. It'll have to be a combination between your early intervention center, between the school system, between your doctor. And I am hoping that over the next year it becomes easier. But yes, that is an option that you can ask. And I'm not sure, Kids First, we talk to them, they literally are just, I'm pointing this way, like you can see, but they're, less than a mile from us, and they're great. And then, you also can defer and stay in an early intervention center until 6. That is also an option.
Oh, can you?
Yes.
I heard we couldn't do that.
Yeah. 75% of our parents will defer and remain in EIDT, early intervention day treatment services, through 6, and then they will graduate. About 75% of our parents do.
Okay.
And that's also really
like
good, especially if you have a late birthday. My son had a July birthday, and Missouri wasn't as friendly about stuff like that.
Yeah.
But we were able to get our school district to let him have that 3rd year of preschool services. Mm-hmm. And so he started kindergarten once he was 6.
Charlotte's is in June. Yeah. Charlotte's in June, she'll be 4, and so she would be out next year. And I was told by Kids First, once she's 5, that's it. But if there's a way to defer till 6, I would prefer that. And I don't
absolutely
direct appointment, that information would be great.
Yeah.
Well, that year of maturity is such an important thing.
It is. And we're happy to help with that. But it is very, very common to defer until they turn 6. And so the child will start after their 6th birthday. Because when you think about it, it is easier, right? If they're getting educational services, they're getting a lot of therapeutic services, and it's in one setting like that, it's a lot easier, because once they go to the school system and you do outpatient therapy, then you're kind of like running all over to the different therapies. Yep. So I would really recommend, depending on the development level, I would recommend staying.
And your child will get services like that in the school. They will get OT, PT, and speech. But like Jared said, it's going to look different. It's really focused on their educational access. Yeah. And sometimes we can make a stretch, like, oh, they need to be able to do this in order to do that, but really we are somewhat limited as far as what we can do for students with those the speech, OT, and PT.
Yeah. And here's an example.
Yeah, that's one of the questions I had too, but I mean,
no, go
I've
ahead.
already answered it. Oh, no, just kind of like the differences. That was one I did my homework and had a bunch of pre-questions.
Yeah.
I was like, what is the actual differences between the therapies? My son is autistic and he's got a 504 and so forth and such. And so I was able to keep him out until 6, but he just had therapies. He wasn't in it. I don't know, he's wherever he's on the spectrum, he did not have to go to facility and such. So that's where I was wanting to see about Charlotte, trying to defer her to, because she's gonna be little.
Yeah.
But then it was continuing the therapies too, is kind of how to more medical focused than that school.
It is. So. And here's another example, so we have quite a few students that speak with an augmented and alternative communication device, an AAC device. And we, our therapists, even if they don't get outpatient therapy here's an example. We have a child that's 7 that their family, they were going to Legoland in Florida. So it's not that your speech therapist in school doesn't want to be helpful, but, reprogramming their device so that they communicate with family and can be more social is really not what speech services focus on. So they come here, we program the device, specifically for our speech therapists do, specifically for, what you're doing. It's the social aspect of it. Karen mentioned like balance, we do have some outpatient children now that are in school services, but still come for physical therapy because physical therapy in school is, can you walk to the bathroom? Do you need help to walk to the bathroom? Can you walk up the stairs? And, some of the students that still come here for outpatient therapy may have like profound mobility issues, cerebral palsy, things like that. And so they want to continue the balance and the things like that. And that's something that you'll see a difference in school versus an outpatient therapy clinic.
Yeah. And we could make a stretch. Yeah, we could make a stretch at the school system as far as that goes, like, because you could also include the playground, can they access the playground, things like that. But we're not going to really work on a lot of the medical issues that maybe come along with that physical therapy. We want to make sure they have access to the playground, to the lunchroom, to the bathroom, you'll be able to exit the building, things like that. But we're not going to work on those medical issues. So if that's something that your child needs, then you definitely want to be able to tap into that. Absolutely.
Yeah, the only challenge is we're in Bella Vista, Kids First is in Springdale. So I have one starting kindergarten next year. And so she'll be at Cooper. So that's going to be the challenge. Is I'd wanted her to continue those medical, getting some of those therapies where.
Does Kids First provide transportation?
They do. We bring her. We just haven't gotten into the pieces on it, but that is something to ask. Yeah,
I would definitely ask about that because we do provide transportation here, and it's a billable Medicaid service, and so go to an EIDT center, that may help. But you're right. That's a lot of times why kids may you might have a typically developing child. And then you want them to be able to go to the same school. So that's a lot of times when they won't defer till 6, they'll go ahead and send them to school. But, just because it's easier for the parents, and we understand that.
Well, because we're in Bella Vista, my husband and I both for Walmart. And so we're always back and forth, but we do it for Charlotte. So that's kind of where, we make it work. And
sure.
Another question I have is about school choice. I've heard of that, but I don't know a lot about it. But I'm curious what that was.
Brian, do you want to take that one?
So I'm going to claim a little bit of the new card on this because I'm still fairly new to Arkansas. But my understanding is that you don't have to attend the school or the district where you live. You can go to another district, and so you have that choice to put your child in a different district if you choose to do that. And you don't have to pay tuition. You don't have to, do anything like that. I do think that you would have to provide your own transportation. Is that right, Jared?
You do. You will in that case, but the funding follows the child.
Right.
But
right.
You do have to provide transportation.
And so like,
Okay.
even in special education situations, so like we live in Siloam, if we wanted our kid to go to Gentry, then the transportation issue, I would assume, would be up to us versus up to Gentry.
It would.
But they would still get any services that
Mhm.
he would need in that school district.
Yeah. And most most school districts will try to help with transportation, but they can't guarantee,
Right.
and with the
Especially
staff.
if it's quite a ways,
Yeah,
I mean, Gentry's just down the road from us, but
for sure.
Yeah, and I bring that up because Lindsay, I was talking to someone, but they mentioned P Ridge, and so I'm in Bella Vista. P Ridge is 15 minutes, Cooper City, and I heard that they had where I went to school in Louisiana, all the schools here are just great. So that's why I didn't really go into a school choice type deep dive and stuff. But I have heard P Ridge is excellent, as well as far as special education services and stuff. But I'm starting my research now.
Yeah. Well, and
So,
I'll tell you, so our ex-board president, her daughter goes to P Ridge, and I'm happy to give you her name. Well, Kluwani. She wouldn't care if I said Kluwani Billings.
Do you know
She's-
Kalani, Sharon, or Shannon? Sorry.
I don't, but
If not, we'll connect you.
Yeah, absolutely.
okay.
Kluwani is we call her our spiritual special education guide, right? She looked at all of the services. She's very involved. I liked on the on one of Brian's slides, it's like, don't be afraid to stand up. I mean, she is a passionate advocate. And you are correct. I don't want to talk about, I don't like to talk about one school district being better, but we do have a lot of families that are checking out P Ridge. It's a smaller environment, and they're doing some great things. So
Okay,
you're
yeah.
right. It's close to you in Bella Vista. And that is one of the cases where transportation, and it is this year anyway, but transportation isn't as big of an issue because they will pick up children in Bella Vista for sure. So but I would definitely talk to Kluwani about that.
Yes, I would.
Yeah.
Okay. Thank you.
Mhm. And again, Shannon, call Karen if you have any questions. Again, we are sister agencies with everybody. We're all doing the same thing. And so, there's no competition. It's just, if you have questions, Karen has been in the field for 15 or 20 years and she'll be happy to answer and go over the benefits of like staying in early intervention or EADT versus.
Yeah, I'll probably reach out just to be able to see how I can get her to extend it, because she's going to be 5 in January and she's tiny.
Right.
I mean, if I could extend her, because it was such a benefit for my son when he was 5 and 6. And so with him, I just went to the school and signed a waiver. He was fine. It's just that what I want her to continue into Kids First, to continue those therapies in that environment.
Mm-hmm.
So,
I would recommend it.
And the only reason I'll say we didn't do Sunshine School is because we needed someone, she was like 6 to 8 months with the fourth, which 6 to 8 weeks when she was older, and I think it was like 12 months or 18 months.
12 months, is when we start.
And so once she got old enough, we just loved everyone there.
They're amazing. They're an amazing agency.
Yeah, for sure.
So they're in good
Is that
hands.
Karen that can assist with that too?
Yeah, absolutely. For
I
sure.
love them. I love them. All the nurses, all the
they talk a lot. So Karen talks a lot to the children's services directors at Kids First or Kids for the Future and all of that. We all, because what happens in EIDT services is a lot of times we're on a waiting list. And so depending on the geographical area that you're in, we'll try to do whatever we can to get you in any services that are available. So yeah.
Yeah. Okay. So would Karen be able to help me with her too? Is that what?
Yeah, she can. Yes.
Okay.
She'd love to.
Okay, Crystal, anybody else have any questions? No? All right. Well, thanks, guys. This was very informative. It always is. I always pick up something new, and which is great. So, and I did record this, so hopefully people can watch it later who weren't able to join us. So,
Good.
all
right.
right. Well, everyone enjoy your very, very rainy, stormy Saturday.
Well, it's good to meet everybody. Thanks for having
All
us.
right.
Thank
Thanks,
you all.
guys.
Thank
you so
much.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Okay.
All right. Bye-bye.
Bye.